For a century, Zorro has defended the people from the forces of tyranny and oppression. That is how long it's been since the masked avenger first appeared in print, and since he was first made famous in the 1920 feature film The Mark of Zorro by and with Douglas Fairbanks. In this 100th anniversary retrospective, I will explore how it was that movie, more than anything else, which put Zorro on the map. How it also paved the way for Batman, and what the future might still hold for the Fox. Before Batman, before Superman, before even the Phantom appeared in comic books and newspaper strips, the stories of the heroes, anti-heroes, and high adventure of the day were conveyed in pulp magazines. Before Flash Gordon, before Conan, before The Shadow, before even Buck Rogers, Zorro made his mark in The Curse of Capistrano. The story introduced the foppish playboy Don Diego Vega and his alter ego, as the local authorities called him, masked bandit Zorro, who defended the people from the despotic authorities of California of the day and carved his symbol, the letter Z, into those who crossed swords with him. The Curse of Capistrano was first published in 1919 in 5 parts between the August 9th and September 6th issues of Argosy All-Story Weekly, one of the leading pulp magazines of the time. Written by history buff and former police reporter as well as Army Public Affairs officer turned writer Johnston McCulley. The Curse of Capistrano took place in the early 19th century California during the era of Mexican rule before it became a US state. The setting was the rural California countryside and among historic Spanish missions and pueblos such as San Juan Capistrano. Likely inspirations for the character of Zorro were, among other things, the legend of Joaquin Murrieta, sometimes called the Robin Hood of the West, and the stories of the Scarlet Pimpernel by the Baroness Orczy. After 100 years of itself directly and indirectly influencing other derivative works, The Curse of Capistrano remains to this day a good read, and one I highly recommend. At the time, however, it was more than merely a good read. Numerous compatible pulp stories were published each week, but The Curse of Capistrano stood out in a way that few others did, to the point of even attracting the attention of the biggest star of the day. One can argue whether Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tom Cruise best fit the bill of the last action hero, but Douglas Fairbanks was the first. His stage persona of a feckless, lovable, confident, yet perpetual adolescent that nothing could get to made him the right kind of hero in a nation that was rapidly changing. And since 1915, he had made himself one of the biggest stars in Hollywood and a household name. Though Fairbanks was already serving as producer for his own films at Paramount, the leading studio of the day, Kevin Jack Hagopian, senior lecturer in media studies at Penn State University, maintained that Fairbanks had even grander plans, of films made on gigantic budgets, of movies made from the world's most thrilling stories and set in exotic climes. Fairbanks wanted nothing less than to translate the distinctively American screen character he already inhabited into a worldwide figure. One who could vanquish foreign armies, oriental tyrants, and medieval injustice with the same flamboyant grace with which he'd made Manhattan his kingdom in His Picture in the Papers in 1916. And so, with Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and director D.W. Griffith, he formed United Artists in 1919. The venture would give him complete control over the production and distribution of his films. It was the most remarkable financial arrangement any entertainer in American popular culture had ever attempted. He needed a story with which he could launch both United Artists and his international ambitions though, and along with his production partner, and later wife, Mary Pickford, he found it in Johnston McCulley's The Curse of Capistrano. The deal came together quickly, and Fairbanks adapted the original story for screen himself, under the pseudonym Elton Thomas, alongside Eugene Miller. It wasn't difficult. The Curse of Capistrano was a standalone story, already cinematic in its conception, so the finished movie was practically a page-for-page adaptation of it. Since this was a silent film, the biggest challenge was how to condense the dialogue and scene descriptions onto the title cards. However, the original title, The Curse of Capistrano, wouldn't do, so they came up with a new title, The Mark of Zorro. The Mark of Zorro premiered on November 27th of 1920, little more than a year after The Curse of Capistrano was first published. Just like it, The Mark of Zorro tells the story of Don Diego Vega, the outwardly foppish son of wealthy ranchero Don Alejandro in the old Spanish California of the early 19th century. Seeing the mistreatment of the plebe by rich landowners and the oppressive colonial government, Don Diego, who is not as effete as he pretends, has taken on the identity of the masked Robin Hood-like rogue Senor Zorro, champion of the people, who appears out of nowhere to protect them from the corrupt administration of Governor Alvarado, his henchmen the villainous Captain Juan Ramon, and the brutish Sergeant Pedro Gonzalez. With his sword flashing and an athletic sense of humor, Zorro scars the faces of evildoers with his mark, Z. When not saving the day as Zorro, Don Diego courts the beautiful Lolita Pulido with bad magic tricks and worse manners. She can't stand him. She is also courted by the villainous Captain Ramon, and to make the triangle complete, by the dashing Zorro, whom she is attracted to. The movie was directed by Fred Niblo, and in addition to Douglas Fairbanks as Don Diego Vega and his alter ego Zorro, the movie co-starred Noah Beery Sr. as the brutish Sergeant Gonzalez and Marguerite de la Motte as Lolita Pulido, Don Diego's romantic interest. The movie was a smash hit, both in the US and abroad. More than that, it created a new template for how action movies would be made going forward. It made Douglas Fairbanks an even greater star than he already was, and it made the character of Zorro capture the imagination of audiences worldwide. Even Zorro's outfit was a product of the movie. He didn't look like that in the original story. On that note, both the original story and the movie adaptation were written and conceived as standalone stories, and neither of them left the door open for any further Zorro adventures. It was exclusively due to the success of the movie that Zorro was brought out of his early retirement. Following the success of the Fairbanks movie, and the public demand for more Zorro stories, Johnston McCulley would return to the character and write new Zorro adventures, on and off from 1922 up until his death in 1958. Many of these stories would later be published as novels, and in the republishing, The Curse of Capistrano would be retitled as The Mark of Zorro. Such was the impact of that movie. However, while McCulley could retcon away the ending of his original story in order to continue the adventures of Zorro in print, Douglas Fairbanks took a different approach on the big screen. In order to make a sequel to his movie, Fairbanks appropriated the 1909 novel Don Q's Love Story, written by the mother and son duo Kate and Hesketh Pritchard, and reframed that into a story about the son of Zorro. It too was a hit, and Fairbanks would go from strength to strength, right up until the advent of the talkies, by which time he was fast approaching 50, the depression was a fact, and his carefree adolescent attitude was no longer appropriate. Only then would his star fade. But Zorro was only just beginning to shine and leave his mark on popular culture. In the 100 years since the release of the Fairbanks movie, Zorro has appeared in almost as many movies, serials, and series, both live-action and animated. Some of this was made in Europe, some in Latin America, some in Turkey, some were parodies, some were softcore porn, and not all of them were officially licensed or endorsed. It's beyond the scope of this video to go through them all, but let's highlight some select ones. In 1940, 20 years after the release of the Douglas Fairbanks classic, The Mark of Zorro was remade, starring Tyrone Power, Linda Darnell, and Basil Rathbone. The Ruben Mamoulian directed feature is fantastic, and it has some of the most intense, down and dirty rapier fights ever put on film. Another smash hit, this iteration of Mark of Zorro gave the character an even greater presence in pop culture, internationally as well as stateside. The majority of all those other Zorro movies and serials followed in the wake of this one. There had already been a couple of Zorro serials, and more would come later, but Zorro's Black Whip nonetheless stands out. Production company Republic Pictures wanted to capitalize on Zorro's renewed fame and popularity in the aftermath of the Tyrone Power movie, but they didn't have the rights to actually use the Zorro character on screen. Instead, the serial featured a Zorro knockoff called the Black Whip, but he got himself killed early on, leaving his sister to take on the Black Whip mantle and kick some ass for the rest of the serial. In other words, Linda Sterling played the first female Zorro in all but name way back in 1944. Between 1957 and 1959, Disney produced 78 half-hour episodes of Zorro starring Guy Williams. Some of these episodes were cut together and released as feature films, but they started out as episodes. This series was also massively popular, and in being Disney, it introduced a whole new generation of kids to the character, and in its wake followed a whole slew of merchandise and other licensed products. Before he was Skeletor, before he was Dracula, Frank Langella also portrayed Zorro in the 1974 version of The Mark of Zorro. This version was made for TV, it served as a pilot for a possible TV series, and it was practically a shot-for-shot remake of the Tyrone Power version, even to the point of recycling its score. It isn't very good, the TV series failed to materialize, but it did serve to keep Zorro in the limelight and public consciousness after his popularity had started to wane. After a parody movie and short-lived filmation series, and even more short-lived live-action series in the 80s, Zorro made a major comeback in the New World television series for the Family Channel in 1990. For 88 episodes spanning 4 seasons, Duncan Regger would portray Zorro in an excellent series. On a personal note, this is the series I grew up with, and which made me a fan of the character. It served to put Zorro back on the map in a big way, which helped pave the way towards a big screen revival. The 1998 feature film, directed by Martin Campbell, saw Anthony Hopkins portray an older Don Diego de la Vega, who after some Count of Monte Cristo-style shenanigans, ends up training Antonio Banderas' character, Alejandro Murrieta, the fictional brother of Joaquin Murrieta, who inspired Johnston McCulley in the first place, to become the next Zorro. There is, by the way, plenty of precedence for this in earlier movies and serials. Don Diego is always the first Zorro, but he isn't necessarily the last. Anyway, the movie was also a huge hit, and it was followed by a somewhat less successful sequel in 2005. Since then, Zorro has appeared in a number of TV series around the world, and he has seen some of his finest days in the pages of the comics. Numerous different iterations of Zorro comics have been published over the years, and again, it's beyond the scope of this video to go through them all, but let's explore some of the more notable ones. The legend where Zorro Comics is concerned is of course Alex Toth, who started illustrating the licensed Dell 4-color Zorro comics following the launch of Disney's TV series in 1957. In the 1990s, Topps started publishing Zorro comics, written by Don McGregor, who massively expanded the mythos. Among other things, he created the supporting character Lady Rawhide, who for all intents and purposes is a second female Zorro, following the Black Whip. In 2008, Dynamite started publishing Zorro comics, written by Matt Wagner. His was a very interesting run, in that it not only did a great job in bringing the Zorro stories to life, it teamed Zorro up with Django from Django Unchained, in a story that was co-written by Quentin Tarantino himself. His run also introduced a third Lady Zorro, this one simply called Lady Zorro. The reason I bring that up is that as of the making of this video, a female Zorro movie is in the early stages of development. Who knows if it will be made, and who knows if it will be any good, which I hope it will be, but in either event, if anyone tries to tell you that a female Zorro that is fighting for social justice in any way is unique or progressive, keep in mind, there were 3 female Zorros already, one of them in live action, nearly 80 years ago. Anyway, back to the comics. You can do a lot with Zorro in the comics, and that is exactly what American Mythology have been doing. They acquired the Zorro comic book license in 2018, and since then, they've not only reprinted some classics, but sent Zorro to hell and to the land that time forgot, as well as pitted him against Lovecraftian monsters.
You serious?
Yeah, for real. Do check that out if you're up for some very interesting genre bending. You see, there are cool things happening in comics outside of the major publishers, you just have to look for it. But while we're on the topic of comics, let's dive into one of the most notable Zorro influences. Both of Batman's creators, Bob Kane, who came up with the core concept, and Bill Finger, who made that core concept good, have independently of each other cited Zorro as a source of major inspiration. Kane even admitted that the idea of Batman having a dual identity in the foppish playboy Bruce Wayne came to him because of Douglas Fairbanks' Mark of Zorro. A later addition to the Batman mythos was the Batcave, and that too came from Zorro, who uses the cave underneath his hacienda as his lair. On that note, in the 1990s Zorro series, Adam West made a guest appearance as Professor Wayne, an implied ancestor of Bruce Wayne. He loved that cave. Furthermore, it is comic book canon that the movie that the Waynes saw just before Martha and Thomas Wayne were gunned down was the Mark of Zorro. But if it was the Fairbanks or Tyrone Power version depends on which run, but it's always one of the two. Or in the case of Todd Phillips' Joker, the parody movie and unofficial Mark of Zorro sequel, Zorro the Gay Blade. In any event, Batman is part of the legacy of Douglas Fairbanks' The Mark of Zorro. Without Douglas Fairbanks' 1920 feature film, Zorro's only appearance would have been in The Curse of Capistrano, the story in which he both debuted and retired. If he had stayed retired, which was creator Johnston McCauley's original intention, Zorro would have been all but forgotten today. The Douglas Fairbanks feature film not only put Zorro into the public consciousness, it inspired the creation of Batman. And who knows which other ripple effects can be traced back to it. Both the Douglas Fairbanks original and the 1940 remake have been selected by the United States Library of Congress to be preserved for all time in the National Film Registry, as they were both culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. If you haven't seen them, I would suggest you do. The first one is even available for free right here on YouTube. Let me know if you've seen it and your general thoughts on Zorro in the comments.